A set of production restrictions that were initially announced last year will be extended, as agreed upon on Sunday by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and their allies in OPEC+. The timeframe of that extension will now encompass the remainder of this year and the entirety of 2025, instead of the second half of 2024 as was previously widely anticipated. OPEC sort of blinkered. The goal of the output cuts was to stabilize oil prices and potentially push them upward. With 2.2 million BPD of voluntary cuts made by 8 OPEC countries and 3.66 million BPD of group-wide restrictions, the total amount of oil withheld from markets is close to 6 million BPD, and it will remain withheld for an additional 18 months. Nevertheless, following the OPEC+ summit and declaration, oil prices fell. They fell hard. One aspect of the official statement caused prices to fall, underscoring the increasing difficulty of OPEC+'s price control mission. The group stated that although OPEC+ would continue to reduce, it might start to reduce some of these later in the year if market circumstances improve. That is, if benchmarks hit the targeted level. The odds of it happening are pretty low, based on how traders have responded to reports of potential fresh supply entering the market. Hence, OPEC+ is forced to maintain the cutbacks for the foreseeable future and hope that its demand estimates prove to be accurate. The cartel's demand growth estimate for 2024, which called for increase of 2.2 million BPD to bring the total to 104.5 million BPD, was reaffirmed by OPEC's Secretary General last month. OPEC projects a minor slowdown in demand growth to 1.8 million BPD for the upcoming year. Thus, it decided to keep most of its cuts in place while also giving the UAE access to a higher production baseline, or increased output, starting in January of the following year. The UAE's quota increases by 300,000 BPD due to the higher baseline. The news of reduced U.S. retail gasoline prices coupled with the 300,000 barrels per day sparked a collapse in oil benchmarks, with Brent and WTI each losing more than $4 per barrel in a single day. This decline indicates that the market is still split on OPEC's demand estimates, or more accurately, that it is still not aligned with OPEC's assessment of the circumstances. The idea of sluggish demand growth appears to be supported by data for the first 5 months of the year. Oil imports into Asia from January to May were 100,000 barrels per day higher than during the same time in 2023, at an average of 27.19 million barrels per day, according to LSE Group data that Reuters' Clyde Russell cited. Russell stated in a post this week that this rise was far weaker than what OPEC would require for its projected expansion of 2.2 million barrels per day to materialize. The drop in the U.S. average price of gasoline also added to the pessimistic attitude of traders, which set off the sell-off that cost WTI almost $6 per barrel on Monday and drove down Brent by $4 per barrel. According to Gas Buddy, the average had dropped by $0.058 to $3.50 a gallon, which was instantly interpreted as a sign of declining demand in the country that uses the most petroleum globally. With no other choice than to maintain the cuts for as long as required and hope that demand would increase in the second half of the year, OPEC+ is left with no viable options. This is hardly the best case scenario because a greater market share and oil prices below $80 per barrel would make some OPEC and OPEC+ producers very happy. Eventually, these producers might get disgruntled with the cuts, which would make it more difficult to maintain them. Besides, the cuts aren't going to stay forever. The only chance for success for those in OPEC is increased demand. Growing exports of American petroleum, growing pipeline networks along the U.S. Gulf Coast, and soaring shale output have made WTI, the benchmark price for U.S. crude, a powerful force in the world oil market. In the early 2010, WTI crude's discount to the global benchmark Brent crude was close to $20 a barrel. Today, it is less than $3. Soaring American production during the first shale revolution in early 2010 was capping the price of WTI oil, which traded at a $15 to $20 per barrel discount to Brent, the benchmark price of the oil pumped in the North Sea. This continued until the U.S. allowed in 2015 crude oil exports to international markets outside of Canada. Due to significant midstream delays and the fact that American petroleum was only being sent to Canada, Brent Petroleum was selling for a significant premium above American oil. However, American exports surged and WTI became a more significant benchmark in the oil markets after the United States permitted crude oil exports in 2015 and midstream operators took advantage of the chance to construct pipelines in Texas and Louisiana leading to the U.S. Gulf Coast export terminals. With a growing client base in Europe and Asia, U.S. crude oil exports have skyrocketed from approximately 400,000 barrels per day, BPD, in 2015, almost all of which went to Canada, to over 4 million BPD this year. The United States has become the world's top oil producer in 2018, overtaking Saudi Arabia and Russia, who have been limiting their supply to the market as part of the OPEC+ accords. Since 2016, the country's crude oil production has increased dramatically. After the oil market collapse of 2015 and 2016, the OPEC Plus agreement was formed in late 2016 and started regulating member production. The goal was to maintain stable oil prices. The United States currently produces more than 13 million barrels of crude oil per day, while Saudi Arabia and Russia don't even have that capacity. The United States would have remained the world's greatest producer of crude oil even in the absence of any OPEC Plus agreements. American oil has become so significant that last year WTI Midland, which is produced in Texas, was one of 3 grades that supported the contract and was included in the dated Brent portion of the Brent benchmark. WTI Midland, which was included in the Brent basket in June 2023, has played a significant role in the recent surge in U.S. crude oil exports, particularly to Europe. Delivered into Rotterdam, a major crude oil trading and storage hub in the Netherlands, is the WTI crude oil used to calculate the dated Brent price. Thus, according to estimates from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, the Netherlands received an average of 652,000 barrels of crude oil per day in 2023, more than any other nation. Crude oil exports from the United States reached a record high level since the country's prohibition on the majority of crude oil exports was lifted in 2015, as U.S. production of the commodity exceeded predictions of a notable slowdown in growth last year and reached new highs once more. According to EIA data released earlier this year, U.S. crude oil exports reached an all-time high of 4.1 million barrels per day last year, up 13%, or 482,000 barrels per day, over the previous record set a year earlier, in 2022. Since the majority of exports were banned in 2015, U.S. crude oil exports have increased annually with the exception of 2021. Due to Western sanctions imposed on OPEC Plus member Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, Europe emerged as the top consumer of U.S. crude oil last year. American crude is becoming a major player in the world market due to its increasing exports from the United States and its growing impact in the physical oil market trades. Analysts predict that a narrower WTI to Brent spread will result in higher netbacks for U.S. oil producers but also higher U.S. gasoline prices. According to Mark Pussard, head of risk at APM Capital, a narrower spread tends to align these prices more closely, while a wider spread often means lower prices for U.S. consumers and higher prices for European consumers. The importance of WTI crude in the global oil market could increase due to rising U.S. oil production, the possibility of more deepwater ports along the U.S. Gulf Coast coming online to handle supertankers, and the expansion of the midstream network in Texas.